Please like and leave a heart. Please.
There we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Vidor Locksmith Show. I'm your host, David Gibson, where we are unlocking the secrets to success in the oil and gas industry, one interview, one technical presentation, and one technical screw-up at a time. Here for the second show of the 2025 season. Thank you guys so much for being here with us. Please let us know where you're watching from. Love to be able to give everybody a shout out here on the show in the beginning. We've had a absolutely phenomenal week. Thank you for everybody that tuned in last week. We had George King on the show. If you have not seen that episode, be sure to go back and watch it. If you haven't seen George King's first episode with us, go back and watch that one as well. Both of them are on YouTube. If you can find them on LinkedIn, then watch them there. You'll be able to see all the comments and everything that come in. But appreciate you guys all watching. We do have an amazing sponsor for today's show, AKM. They will be the ones giving away a $50 gift card, and we'll be giving away one of our 3D printed drill bits. So be sure to be able to put in hashtag AKM into the comment section at some point in time. Let's look at the comments, see who all's watching and tuning in here with us this week. Of course, we've got the one and only Mr. John DeWart, who's always here, and I am so appreciative of his faithful watching and being a guest on the show. He was on there at the end of 2024. So be sure to go and check out his episode. Actually, he's been on here twice. So check out the first one and the second one that he did with us. So he says, good morning from Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. As a regular commercial airline passenger, my thoughts go out to the families of those killed. Oh, yes. Actually did see that. I don't keep up with the news quite as much as I should, but did see that one. So yeah, thoughts and prayers go out to the families affected there. All right, Eric, tune in as per usual from sunny south of France. I need to make a trip out there at some point in time to be able to go see. Then Isaac Fonseca tuning in from Katy. Thanks for being here, sir. Do appreciate it. John tuning in from Colombia. Wow, definitely got the international show going today. Do appreciate it. Robert tuning in from Houston, Texas. Thanks for being here, sir. He's a former guest as well. And the infamous and most famous user here, our viewer on the show, the LinkedIn user, says good morning from the Sunshine State. So there we go. Michael tuning in from Abu Dhabi. Thanks for being here, sir. And then good morning all. Hashtag AKM. So it's Kindle. Thanks for, yep, there we go. Put in hashtag AKM. Like I said, $50 gift card and one of our 3D printed drill bits. Speaking of which, we've got a quick commercial from our sponsor. We'll go ahead and roll that, and then we'll get our show started with our guest of the day. All right, guys, don't forget, put in hashtag AKM for your chance to be able to win one of the 3D printed drill bits and a $50 gift card to Starbucks. So, like I said, anytime throughout the show, and then at the end of the show, we'll do the drawing. Anybody that's seen the show before knows the deal. And with that, I'd like to be able to welcome Mr. The Honorable Jason Isaac, right?
Yeah, David, thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming in and being here. I have to tell everybody the crazy story of like how I met you. So I'm driving through from my office back to the house. I go home every day for lunch. And as I'm driving by, one of the little shopping centers over here has just a little signage out front that's got all the, there's the mail stop, there's the real estate place, a couple of others. And one of them said American Energy Institute. And I was like, what in the world is this? And so, I continued on and went home. But the whole time I'm eating lunch, I'm like, what is it's like literally down the street. It's like, what is this thing? And so essentially what I did is when I was coming back from lunch, I pulled into the parking lot, found where the office, so you've got one of the leased offices there. And so I just went in, just knocked on the door and was like, hey, I'm David. What are you doing? And so
and it was so surprising to find someone that works in the industry here in Wimberley, Texas, of all places, because I'm typically officed in downtown Austin, but I'm all over the place: Houston, Midland, Denver a lot, Wyoming and Montana a lot. But I live here in the Hill Country, and I thought I need an office that's close, that's outside of my house, and so just got a little office space and built a studio in there, and then learned that you've got a studio, and I was like, oh my gosh, just a small world. But it was great to visit that day, and here we are.
And so that's kind of how this like random course of events took place. So give everybody a little bit of background on who you are and like what you're doing in the energy space. What is the American Energy Institute? A little bit about your background as well, because obviously that's important in the whole mix of the conversation as well.
And you mentioned the honorable. That's what happens when you serve as an elected official at the state or federal level. You get that designation. I call that the letters. Some people get PhD or MBA after their name. I get HON before mine. 8 years of service in the Texas House of Representatives. I served 4 terms, started out with 3 counties, then had redistricting and had 2 counties in Texas. About 200,000 bosses that I worked for 8 years in the Texas House of Representatives. And our legislature is a little different in the state of Texas. You get paid $600 a month to do the job. So it's really tough to make a living on $7,200 a year if you're doing the math at home.
Wow.
So it's a part-time. They call it part-time. It's really full-time. So you've got to have 2 full-time jobs. And I'm a slow learner. I only did 4 terms, and I learned that it's really hard to make a living on $7,200 a year. It's hard to raise a family. And I'm not independently wealthy. I'm not retired, and I'm not an attorney. And those are kind of 3 things that you need to be able to survive in the service and raise a family. And so for me, it was like 8 years is enough. I'm getting out. I need to get back into the real world. Prior to that, I was in sales and marketing. I marketed technology to a lot of oil and gas companies, pipeline companies. Started out with remote satellite systems, and then it was onboard tracking systems and communication systems, mostly satellite-based systems. And so I did that, but my frustrations with some policies that were changing is what led me into service and to run for office and to get elected. And then as I was in office, I thought, we do a really good job here in Texas of our environmental leadership, of producing oil and gas and coal and uranium. We do a good job in this state. Economic prosperity is incredible, but we're not telling the story very well. And so I really chose to serve and requested to serve on some committees: our Environmental Regulation Committee, our Energy Resources Committee, Small and Economic Development Committees. So I did that for my time in office. And then as I was leaving office, I went to work for the Texas Public Policy Foundation, the largest state-based think tank in the country, in the United States, that really focuses on state legislative issues, policy. Does a lot of research. They're a 501c3. And my time there, I worked and led their energy and environment initiative. Our mission statement is to raise America's energy IQ. And then about a year and a half ago, through some research that I had done, decided to launch a new trade organization. And so that's the American Energy Institute. We're a free market, unabashedly free market trade organization that represents American energy producers and companies in the American energy space that are primarily going to be oil, gas, coal, and nuclear. We're anti-subsidies. We're anti-political agendas. We are really pro-free markets and pro-American energy, this energy dominance that you're hearing so much about now. And so that's kind of led me to where I am today.
Wow. So in going from essentially like the service side of the industry to being in the public domain, I guess you could say, what was one of the biggest like eye openers for you once you got over to the other side? Because obviously from the outside, looking in, it's just a lot of chaos and stuff, nothing getting done.
Yeah.
What was it that you really learned, like once you got in there, that it was just like, I'm guessing there's a million stories about it, but like what would be good for people to be able to know?
Well, it's important for people to know. And I would remind people, and for me, I referred to my constituents as my bosses. And I think constituents, the people that have elected officials that work for them, need to know that they're someone's boss. and to communicate with people that serve them, to let them know, not just elect them and trust that they're going to do the right thing, because they're not all experts in certain areas. And so when I got elected, my chief of staff, who's now a state representative, Ellen Troxclair, she told me, she's like, because I was wanting to work on education, I was wanting to work on healthcare, I was wanting to work on border issues and public safety issues and energy and environment. And she's like, slow down. You need to pick an issue, 2 at the most, and become the expert in that field on the policy standpoint. And then know people that you can trust to call when you don't know the particular issues, when you don't know the really details of the industry. So become the expert politically and then policy wise, so that then your colleagues will trust you. And so that's what I did, as I focused on energy and the environment. I wanted to tell the good story about our environmental leadership here and message it in a way that people hadn't heard before. So, and then it's really interesting because one person in an elected position can make a difference. One person can stop really bad policy, or one person can pass really good policy, and one person can pass really bad policy. So it's just really important for people to communicate with their elected officials and let them know. Find them. You know, my wife, who is now an elected official, I recommended that, and I knew this, she's a little more direct, a little more in your face, a little more intense. And my first few months on the job, I called her one day and I was like, I think you do a better job at this than me. And then she's like, ha ha, laughed, never had any desire. But I did. I encouraged her to run. I said, we need more strong, good conservative women that support free markets, that want to reduce costs, want to reduce regulatory hurdles, want to reduce property taxes. We need people like that to serve. And that's you. And it took me about a year, and I finally convinced her to do it. I mentioned I was in sales before I got into politics, so I had to try some tricks on her. I was very persuasive, but she did. She got elected. She's in her 2nd term right now, doing a wonderful job. Property tax is her biggest passion, and cutting that to reduce the burdens. As we've talked to people who are losing their homes because they can't afford them because the tax burden's in this state, and it's really unfortunate. They continue to rise year after year, outpacing inflation. But that was her biggest passion when I was serving. It's her biggest passion now as a public servant herself. But we're going to events tonight, like a Chamber of Commerce event. And so we were at an event already this morning. So it's really important for us to be around people that she serves. And for me, it was important for me to be around people that I worked for so that we could hear from them. And so it's important for the voters out there to go to these events, to get out and meet with their elected officials and talk to them and express their feelings and concerns. Because I had a great conversation with someone this week, and I've talked to probably 4 other people about that conversation, all elected officials, because this person was telling me about their business. They happen to work in the energy space and provide on-site power from flare gas. And I'm like, this is great. I need to talk to other people about this and let them know about success stories where we're actually utilizing what would otherwise be trash and converting it to electricity for on-site generation. I mean, these are good stories that need to be told, and elected officials don't necessarily know this. So that person reached out to me, had a conversation, and now I'm sharing it with elected officials through our trade organization.
So I have to say this. So it wasn't you and your wife having an argument saying, well, what, you think you could do a better job? And then she was like, yeah, I do think I could do a better job. Why don't you get out of the way and let me.
I did joke that people, asked me why I was voting a certain way. And I was like, well, my wife told me to. And if she primaries me, I'm gone because she would destroy me in a primary. So yes, but no, there's about 4 years between my service and her service.
So tell me this, like, what are some of the things that, when you were in office that you were hearing from people in the energy sector, and what are the things that, were helpful to you to be able to hear from them, to be able to help you in the job role that you had? So for the people that are watching, know, like, okay, it's not just like call and complain about, the neighbor, and their barking dogs, but like what was helpful to you and what would be helpful for people to be able to say?
Yeah, and some of it's actually timely today. When you look at some of the LNG export terminals, there was a pause last administration. That pause has been lifted. But what we were seeing is in Texas, there was just a long permitting process that was taking years. And then you would have these contested case hearings and people drawing it out through legal processes. And it was taking years. And you look right on the state line between Texas and Louisiana, there's LNG export terminals in Louisiana. And they were being built, and billions of dollars was being invested in Louisiana because of the regulatory hurdles in Texas. And it's the pipeline's going right across the state line. It's Texas natural gas, going to be liquefied in Louisiana and exported around the world. But what we found in Louisiana was they had this essentially 45-day permitting process. You knew within 45 days, if you checked all the criteria, if you met all the environmental requirements, then you were going to get a permit. And if you didn't, you knew within 45 days that you weren't going to get that permit. In Texas, that process was taking years.
So I don't even think I could get a house permit.
It's crazy.
That quick here in Wimberley.
Yeah, it's amazing. They really roll out the red carpet, but that predictability is something that we learned from in Texas. And so now we have this, we passed contested case reform is what the policy was called, kind of a technical wonky name, where if someone was contesting the permit, there's a set timeline now of when the business knows. So there's this predictable regulatory climate that I know if I want to build an LNG export terminal, build a pipeline in Texas, that there is a certain timeline that I will have a definitive answer about that and the process will begin. That has been instrumental to economic development, job creation, investment here in Texas. It's one of the reasons why we continue to have a surplus revenue year after year after year. And now the legislature is finally returning some of that surplus to the taxpayers, rightfully so. So that was something that was a great learning experience for me, is to learn what other states are doing and how we can improve here in Texas.
So it's really interesting you say that, because I was having a conversation with somebody not too long ago about Chris, what's his, the new department, Chris Wright. Oh. Yes, Chris Wright. And somebody had said, you know, he's a really smart guy. He's extremely intelligent, but can he make policy? And so kind of like what you're saying is that it's learning how, like, yes, I want these things to work better for our state and for the industry, but then how do you make policy? So was that kind of like a learning curve for you there as well? Was like saying, I want to help in energy, but then like, how do we make policy that helps without causing like a windfall of other issues?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was having a conversation this morning with some firemen and fire chiefs. The unintended consequences of policy, you got to be very careful. In Texas, they got rid of the safety vehicle inspections, so we don't have to go get our vehicles inspected anymore for personal vehicles, but we have to certify when we do our annual registration that they are safe, operable vehicles. And of course, if you're driving a vehicle that's unsafe, the police can pull you over and say, look, you know, you've really got to have 4 tires on that vehicle, not 3 bald tires or 3 spares, or your headlights aren't working, your taillights aren't working. You've got to drive a safe vehicle. So it's still against the law to drive an unsafe vehicle, but it's a self-certification process, which I love. It's eliminated the hassle of having to go get these safety inspections. Well, one thing that they did is they said, but we're going to still have commercial vehicles. So if you're over 26,000 pounds, you've got to have a safety inspection. So now fire trucks all of a sudden are having to do the safety inspection when they didn't before. And so now and fire trucks are really inspected almost daily. I mean, talking to the fire, this is one of these unintended consequences. So
yeah, the EMS place is right here, you know,
yes.
Next to me. And so like every morning, like usually I'm dropping off the kids and about 8 a.m. is about the time I'm driving by, and they're out there, you know, doing their walk
It's amazing. Yeah, it's incredible. And so that was one of these unintended consequences that now policymakers are having to work through. But fire departments are now having this increased cost, increased time burden to go do something they hadn't had to do before, which is unfortunate. So you've got to be careful. You've got to look at policies and make sure there aren't any unintended consequences. But I will say, you mentioned Chris Wright. I've known Chris since 2018. His confirmation vote will be this coming Monday. I'm sure he'll sail through, maybe not as successful as Doug Burgum did. I think some people on the left like Doug Burgum a little bit more than they do Chris Wright, because Chris has been a just very pro-energy person for decades now. He's an MIT student, studied nuclear science at MIT. He's absolutely brilliant, got into oil and gas, is the CEO, I think he's still the CEO, maybe until Monday, of Liberty Energy in Denver. And it was fantastic. He hosted us at Liberty Energy in Denver for a post-election recap on Veterans Day, it was the Monday following the Tuesday election. So we knew the results by then. Fortunately, hosted us for a post-election recap that I did with our economist, Trisha Curtis, the host and the CEO of Petro Nerds.
Yep.
So we did this event, and it was great because that was the same week that Liberty Energy joined our trade organization, which was kind of a nice endorsement from Chris. And the same week, Chris gets nominated to be the Secretary of Energy. So it's awesome. I mean, it's just a great testament to the work that we're doing to eliminate poverty around the world. And that's what energy does. And Chris recognizes that. his company came out with their ESG report a few years ago, the very first one, and we helped. I say we, my team, my communications team, and I that I still work closely with, help them with their edits on the first draft of that so-called Bettering Human Lives
I've got it
report,
sitting around
which
here.
is just I've got one in my office too.
It's sitting around here somewhere. I had it in my hand just the other day.
But it really, and I think some people have issue with that in the U.S. Senate because he's equating energy poverty to poverty. And energy is the key to ending poverty. And some people don't see that. They want us using less energy. And I couldn't disagree more. We need people using more energy, more reliable, affordable energy. And he kept using that term in his confirmation hearing, which I've been trying to profess for years, because a lot of people are saying I'm an all of the above energy policy person. And for me, all of the above includes things that are heavily subsidized, that are dependent on China for components, and aren't available when we need them, and they're not really affordable. And so I've been working with policymakers for years now to drop all of the above, and I've been guilty of using all of the above myself. I found myself, I wrote it in, I think, 2019, 2020 for something. I was like, I can't believe I was that naive to use all of the above. Now it's about affordable and reliable, and that's what the energy policy is. We need to have an energy policy that's affordable and reliable. Chris Wright will not only be a champion in the Department of Energy, but he'll be a champion within the cabinet on educating the other cabinet members on the importance of American energy and the importance of affordable and reliable energy and what it means to the human condition.
Yeah, I would highly recommend for anybody who has not had the opportunity to see Chris Wright speak, to go to YouTube and watch any of the videos, any interviews or podcasts that he's done. I know he's done at least one with Flipping the Barrel. My friends over there, Maciel and Jamie Elrod. So there's that one. The book that he has, you can go to Liberty's website and be able to download and read the PDF version of it, the latest one. But you can also request a hard copy of it and have it sent to you. It's a phenomenal book, and it is not just like a US based thing. This is a oil and gas, energy as a whole viewpoint from what it means to have energy and for the world to be able to have energy and the impact it has. So what he said is like, instead of doing an ESG report where it's like, let's reduce emission reductions, and it has like this kind of like diminishing return over the entire planet, let's look at what we are doing on the positive side and providing energy for the entire planet and how big of an impact that has. So for anybody that is watching that's in the oil and gas industry, if you have not read it or seen some of Chris's talking points, it is 100% worth it. Like, it's not just a US or Texas-based kind of energy thing. It is something for everybody in the oil and gas industry to be able to give you kind of like the defensive talking points or the offensive talking points about our industry. So I just want to be able to plug it. I think it's phenomenal. Tracy and I both went to go see him speak at the Central Texas AADE event in San Antonio, the Petroleum Club. Got to meet him, got to talk with him for a little bit. Phenomenal guy. Super intelligent.
Yes.
He's very, very smart. And I'm thrilled that he's in the position that he's in.
I am too. I couldn't be happier. The first time I heard him speak was in 2018 at an energy conference. It's basically a conference of energy policy makers that get together from energy producing states. And he was talking, and he went through his energy poverty presentation, and he's showing Haiti and the Dominican Republic. In one area, you can see the border, because one is deforested and the other one is not, and because one has access to affordable and reliable dense energy and the other doesn't, and so they've used trees for their energy source, and they've completely cut down the trees. It's the exact same soil. And then he goes into North Korea and South Korea. One has access to you can see the border at night because of the lights. One has access to energy and one doesn't.
I mean, that's the cover of the book.
Yeah, that's right. It is. And then he talks, there's a guy named Scott Tinker, who was a former head of the Bureau of Economic Geology and at the University of Texas. And Scott does a couple of videos called Switch and Switch On. And so if you need the visual understanding of energy poverty, you can see people that are using animal dung and other forms of biomass to cook in their homes. And it's Scott is brought to tears in the film, and it brings me to tears because you see small children that are coughing, and you see women that are coughing because of what they're using to cook. And at the end, Scott provides them with a propane cooktop and they can get propane delivered in these third world countries via bicycle. It's really fascinating. But this is one thing that Chris wanted to bring to the world, to the developing world, is just a little propane cooktop and a canister of propane. And you can use telematics to purchase it. He was telling me that they can go in on their cell phones and do a transaction to buy propane to cook and heat their water. That saves women an hour a day. Women will spend an hour a day walking to collect animal dung, biomass, and other things to heat up wood. UNICEF reports that 3.8 million people die annually of pollution from indoor air pollution. And it's because they're cooking with unsafe cooking fuels. Propane's a great cooking fuel. It's very clean. So he was working on that transition. But you go beyond that, you start building people's wealth. And next thing you know is they're going to have energy to have running water. I mean, it would be catastrophic if we lost our grid here. We found this out in Texas the hard way in 2021. You lose access to water and life gets really bleak really quick. You need water. Today, this is another thing that UNICEF reports. Today, women will spend 200 million hours walking to collect water. And then they're using, unsafe cooking fuels to heat that water up to make it somewhat potable. And that's why people are still dying from these waterborne illnesses, from diarrhea, from cholera, and other things that are just, we completely take for granted that we get to walk to a tap and turn on water and have the number one in the world in access to clean and safe drinking water. And it's because of our economic prosperity powered by, again, affordable, reliable energy. And Chris knows that. He knows there's only 1 billion people on the planet. He mentioned this in his testimony last week. There's only 1 billion people on the planet that have access to the things that we have access to. And the fact that it's getting more expensive here in the United States and around the world, places like Germany, the United Kingdom, Germany's electricity costs are more than double what they are here in the United States. Freezing deaths are on the rise in these countries. First world countries, people are freezing to death because they can't afford their utilities. And so it's great for me to be able to represent a trade organization that actually advocates for policies. And I know some of your listeners may not like this or watchers may not like this, but we actually advocate for policies that would reduce the cost of energy, lower the cost of a barrel of oil, lower the cost of natural gas, and then get rid of the regulatory hurdles so that we can get it to market, so that we can get those 7 billion people on the planet that don't get to experience what we take for granted. We can get them access to energy. It's just going to create more customers.
Yeah.
But it's also going to raise the human condition, which is our goal. Our goal is to liberate American energy to raise the human condition.
So talk to me about that a little bit, about what you are doing with the American Energy Institute, and how do you guys go about, getting policy changes or doing the things that are going to, have essentially a worldwide impact?
Well, I think the one of the things that we have done and that I really had my hands in is working with Texas legislators. And I started hearing about this from energy companies, whether they were in the frac sand or drilling or just tertiary businesses, were telling me that their banks weren't loaning them money because they were in the oil and gas business. And I said, no, come on, they can't do that. That's illegal. That's discrimination. And they said, well, they are. We're being told that our ESG score is too low, and so they can't loan us money. And I'm like, wait, what is ESG? In 2018, 2019, I didn't know what that term meant. And I said, oh, basically, they're just discriminating against you because you're in a politically unfavored business. They think they know what's best for the world, and so they're pushing their globalist agenda on you. And they said, yeah, that's what ESG is. And so this is what people were telling me. And I said, well, I know how to fix this. If they're going to boycott oil and gas in Texas, then Texas should just boycott them. And there was a bill that I had helped with when I was my last legislative session, 2017, geared towards our stance with Israel. And it was that if you boycott, divest, or sanction Israel, then you can no longer do business with the state of Texas, which was fine. We're going to publish a list of companies that boycott Israel, and guess what? You don't get to do business with Texas. And it's not just about doing business with Texas; it's every single subdivision of the state of Texas. So every city, county, municipality, the EMS service you mentioned, the fire departments, they're all Texas. They're all subdivisions of the state of Texas. So when Unilever was put on the boycott list because they boycotted Israel, because of a Ben & Jerry's company refused to sell ice cream in the West Bank of Israel because of their opposition to Israeli, they say, occupation, they put them on the boycott list in Texas. And guess what Unilever did? they sold that business of Ben & Jerry's. And now Ben & Jerry's, the original founders of Ben & Jerry's, are suing Unilever for that, selling their business in Israel. But Unilever didn't want to be on the boycott list in Texas. It's the 8th largest economy in the world. And so in 2020, I'm out of the legislature. I'm meeting with these energy companies and I'm saying, let's come up with a good policy to push back. Let's fight back. And wrote the bill that became Senate Bill 13 that says if you boycott fossil fuels, and I was very clear it had to be fossil fuels because companies had a clear divestment position against coal, but they weren't as clear against oil and natural gas. So it's fossil fuels in statute. It passed. It became law. Today, companies like BlackRock are on the boycott list in Texas because they discriminate against oil and gas companies. They make them do something that's otherwise not part of their ordinary business purpose, is how the statute is defined. And BlackRock, who I've met with several times, say we invest billions of dollars in oil and gas in Texas. And I say, yes, you do. And then you tell them they need to transition. And they're like, well, yeah, it's part of the energy transition. I said, so you're telling an oil and gas company they need to get out of oil and gas? Well, and they kind of get defensive a little bit. And I said, so you're going to be on the boycott list, and I'm not going to help you get off. If you quit doing that, then maybe you'll get off the boycott list. And to date, they're still on the boycott list. We just had the largest divestment of Texas funds from BlackRock, $8.5 billion last February or March. So not even a year, but that's the largest divestment to date because we don't want to empower them with our dollars, our taxpayer dollars, our pension dollars, and have them use that against the economic best interest of the state of Texas. And so it sent a wake-up call. And after we got that passed in 2021, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia also passed very similar versions. And BlackRock's on the boycott list in some of those states as well. You've had other banks that have been put on the boycott list in West Virginia. And one of them, I can't remember the name of the bank specifically off the top of my head, but they came back and said, we're no longer going to boycott fossil fuels in West Virginia. We're going to make financial services available to companies that are in the industry. My very first experience was Bank of the West. When we did a letter writing campaign to the CEO, we got a bunch of energy CEOs to sign on to a letter to the CEO of Bank of the West. And Bank of the West had come out and said, I think in 2018, that we are no longer going to make funds available to companies that produce more than 25% of their revenues from oil and gas or coal, and maybe forestry. I know it was oil and gas and coal. I know it was the fossil fuels. And we thought, why? They're just discriminating. But Bank of the West is forgetting their roots. I mean, they were started in the Western United States in communities that were mining coal, gold, copper, and then they transitioned to mining more dense energy sources like oil and natural gas. And now they're just completely abandoning their roots. And it was because they got bought by BNP Paribas, this French Brazilian, I tried to combine the two words there, conglomerate. And so it's now we're going to push our political ideology onto your business and debank people. And that's what they were doing. They're on the boycott list in Texas. So you've had some banks that have reversed course and said, we are going to make funds available. I have some numbers that I've published before. It was a 94% reduction over 5 years of capital that was invested into new oil and gas investments. I mean, it was a massive drop in the number of funds that were raised for private investment and the number of dollars that were raised for private investment. So the debanking was very clear. And so Texas pushed back. And so that's something that we do with American Energy Institute is we analyze, we do research, and then we make policy recommendations to really promote more free markets, to eliminate subsidies, to show how inflationary subsidies are. They hurt the least among us. They drive up the cost of energy. And it really, the government should be in the business of picking winners, losers.
So with all of that work that you guys, I mean, because obviously that's a lot. Like, what is I guess you're going and talking to companies in the industry. They are supporting the cause. And then you guys are, going and talking to some of the policymakers and then educating them. Is that like what's kind of the process there of how it works?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. I mean, we have people that join our trade organization that fund the work that we do that are committed to our free market principles. It's kind of unique in some of the research that I was doing is that I found that some trade organizations used to have the term free market or free enterprise in their mission statements, and they dropped it over years. They just became pro markets. And that was because they were supporting, government created markets, trading credits and doing things of that nature. And that's not free markets. And so I was a little dismayed about that. Others were embracing political agendas like ESG and DEI and complying with the Paris Accords, which were meant for countries, not for businesses or cities or counties or states. In my opinion, another political agenda. And so they were getting away from their roots and were serving some of their larger members. And they had larger members that had more importance and more influence over the trade organizations because of their dues structure. If you produce a lot or you have a lot of revenue, then you qualify for board seats. And so when I wrote our bylaws with our existing board members, it was, we're not going to make our board seats for sale. So I don't care what your revenue and your production are, but if you want to support our mission, if you believe with our mission to end poverty, to liberate American energy, to do that, and you support free market principles, come on, we'd love to have you join us. And so we've been fortunate that we're continuing to grow year over year, not only with our association, but we've got a C3 that does research, and we've got individuals that support our 501c3 charitable organization. But that's what we do. We listen to people that work in the industry, and sometimes we disagree with them. But we try to find out where the regulatory hurdles are and where they're being discriminated against, and push back and educate policymakers in DC and in states around the country. And it's kind of refreshing being a former policymaker myself and now visiting with policymakers around the country, that I'm not going to them with a handout. Like, I don't want a tax credit. I don't want a subsidy. We want freedom. We want to get rid of some of those things that are distorting the market. So it's like, wait, you don't want anything from me? I'm like, no, regulatory reform is going to create more jobs and economic prosperity in this country and lower the cost of energy. And they're like, wow, this is refreshing.
So what are some of the big challenges that are in place right now for
I'd say
the industry?
I think one of the things when you talk about industry specifically is, I think the biggest threat that we face is deindustrialization because of rising energy costs. This is happening in Germany and the United Kingdom. You've got 50% of the capacity for manufacturing automobiles in Germany is idle right now. They're getting crushed with higher energy costs. BASF, a large chemical manufacturing company, refining company, is shutting down operations in Germany, and they're citing high energy costs. They're moving things to China, and China for the first time is exporting energy. I mean, this is new to them, but they have been expanding their electric generation. And I've had the opportunity to testify in front of Congress a few times, and I'd say of all the technology the Chinese steal from us, it would be nice if they would utilize our pollution control technology. They don't. They're building a coal-fired power plant every single week. We should be doing the same here in the United States because it's great base load. It's great for on-site storage. It's just a fantastic electric generation source. And because of the pollution control technology, you can build it close to population centers and still have world-leading clean air like we do. But China's been building it. They've been expanding their refining capacity, another thing we have not been doing here in the United States. And now they're exporting diesel, jet fuel, and home heating oil. Partly from oil that they're importing from Canada. A lot of it has to do with oil that they're getting from Iran. They've been sending $5 billion a month to Iran that's funding terrible things all over the Middle East. I mean, the conflict that we have there is directly being funded by Iran and with proceeds from China. So, I kind of digress a little bit and go off the rails here, but we need to educate policymakers. They didn't know this. They don't know that Sri Lanka had embraced decarbonization and banned the use of nitrogen-based fertilizers. They were exporting tea and rice on this. I think I've got something on my Substack and maybe on my website on this just recently because it was coming up in the agriculture confirmation hearings. And the Secretary of Agriculture is a good friend of mine, Brooke Rollins. She's going to do great things there. But Sri Lanka embraced this decarbonization at a time when they were exporting tea, rice. They were exceeding their territorial neighbors like India. They were experiencing on the path to prosperity for the first time ever. And then with one policy, with one administration in 1 year, food production went down 40%. Food costs are up 80%. They're no longer exporting tea and rice, they're importing it. And my understanding today, like 9 in 10 people face hunger on a daily basis in Sri Lanka. And so these are things that I've had policymakers, I mentioned this in a congressional roundtable hearing, and policymakers come up to me like, we didn't know about Sri Lanka. I said, yeah, that's actually your test tube for what decarbonization does. It destroys an economy when you do it that quick. So that's just things that people don't understand about. So that's what we're doing is we're educating policymakers about that. And sometimes we hear this from people that work in the industry. People like Chris Wright have traveled. I think he's mentioned that he's traveled to 55 countries. So his wealth of knowledge has been very influential in our work.
Wow. All right, let's see if we've got any questions for that have come up, because I mean, wow, there's a lot of really good stuff. The whole reason we do a live show is to be able to get everybody's questions, and I've been hogging them all here for about 40 minutes. So happy to hear an energy expert speaking about the importance of ESG factors. What is Jason's opinion about the double materiality versus single materiality?
And we may have to get Eric to expand, because
I haven't even heard.
Yeah, I don't want Eric to put words into my mouth about the importance of ESG factors, because if you do what Chris Wright has done, and he's kind of flipped ESG on its head, because I've seen ESG being used as a tool for bad, where it's been weaponized against people. We did some ESG ratings from one of my board members, Atlas Energy. They had an ESG rating of, I think it was a C. But then you looked at, and this is from one of the 7 different companies that does ESG ratings. And a gentleman that I used to work with, Chuck DeVore, former assemblyman from California, has written extensively about this. But Chuck did the research and showed that, I think it was Atlas Energy, or maybe it was Brigham Minerals, had an ESG rating of a C. They're a real estate company that owns mineral assets. They don't produce oil and gas. They just own the minerals. But they had a C ESG rating. And then the China Energy Coal Company had an A rating. How is that possible? How is that possible? It just shows the weaponization, the manipulation of ESG. Companies like Tesla have had an A from one rating and an F from others. Chevron, same thing, A from one and an F from others. So my experience is I've seen ESG being weaponized against countries. That's why in Texas we passed legislation last legislative session, because I was hearing from actual individuals that say they were denied, that happened to be in the oil and gas industry. They were denied insurance policies because they're in the oil and gas industry. And so what we passed in Texas,
like a homeowner's insurance policy?
Yes. I mean, these were personal things. These weren't business insurance. These were personal auto policies. I personally, before the American Energy Institute, our 501c3 was called the Texas Natural Gas Foundation. And we would help fleets convert their school buses from diesel to propane or natural gas. We'd help them find grants. We were trying to do the same and just educate people about the benefits of using Texas natural gas to try to reduce flaring, which is just a waste of a product that's valuable if you can get it to market. And so we had this nonprofit, and I was calling to renew our automobile insurance policy, and was told, we cannot renew your automobile policy because you have natural gas in your name. And I'm like, we're a 501c3 charitable organization that we don't produce oil and gas. We're not drilling. We don't own any minerals, nothing. We're not in the industry other than an education outreach. And they said, we can't do a policy. And I'm like, you are kidding me. I was absolutely shocked. So I experienced that discrimination firsthand. So we passed a law in Texas that says that you have to base your insurance rate making on risk, not ESG factors. I can't believe that we have to pass a policy to tell companies that are in the risk business, that do great job of assessing risk, that they just need to consider risk. But we did in the state of Texas. So I'm not sure what the materiality between first and second is. I don't know if they're getting into different.
It's like, I need to write a policy that says you have to stop at stop signs, kind of thing. It's like,
that's exactly right. Yeah, we had to do. I mean, you essentially had to do that in Texas. And then what happens is, with these policymakers from around the country get together at conferences annually and learn what other states are doing, good, bad, and ugly. And sometimes you'll get model policy. And that's how I was successful in get our bill passed in Texas and 4 other states. We've had, I think we're up to 27 states have passed fiduciary responsibility models, which is another one. Is like, stop at a stop sign. If you're making investments with state dollars, pension funds for firefighters, teachers, first responders, you need to invest with fiduciary responsibility first and foremost. But we've had to pass bills to do that because companies were investing in other things. They were looking at ESG first and foremost. And one of the times I testified in front of Congress, I showed how dismal the returns were for ESG funds compared to non-ESG funds.
Wow.
It's crazy sometimes that you have to do this, but you get people that get
your
into
job is
positions
to
of
make
power.
money. You should make money.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, and I'm a huge supporter of the Friedman Doctrine when it comes to the responsibility of businesses to their shareholders, not stakeholders, but shareholder capitalism. But it was just amazing to me. But you had some pension fund managers investing with political ideology before fiduciary returns and fiduciary responsibility.
Oof.
But you can do that when you're a public pension fund because you know the state's going to back you. So even if your pension fund goes belly up, guess what? The state's going to be there because they're going to make taxpayers pitch in and pay for it to save it and salvage it.
Tough stuff. Red Flyer Media says, fantastic conversation. I will be watching the confirmation hearing. All right. Next question there from Eric. Boycotting oil and gas, dogmatism, far from any common sense.
Eric, I couldn't agree more with you on that. It's like over 96% of the products. I mean, the stretchy fabric in my pants that I'm wearing right now is because of hydrocarbons. When I introduce myself in front of congressional testimony, I say, I'm Jason Isaac, and I live a high carbon lifestyle. And so should the rest of the world, because you look at places that do, there's a chart, and I think I may have seen this from Chris Wright the first time, there are no low energy wealthy countries. They just don't exist. When the president of Sri Lanka had his palace overrun, he didn't fly to Malawi that's living in net zero. He had a military, fossil fueled plane take him to Singapore, the highest per capita CO2 emissions on the planet, which has clean air and clean water. I visited in 2016. It's immaculate. It's a little humid. It's kind of like Houston in August, and I went in August. It's very humid. It's hot.
A very clean place.
It's very clean. The streets are clean. They have economic prosperity and environmental leadership. And you just go north of there to another country, and the air quality is not what it is in Singapore. It's amazing, but political boundaries actually do have differences in environmental quality.
That's very true. All right, so yes, BASF closing is a huge issue. If you eat, you need to pay attention to this, literally.
I don't want to go net zero food either.
What are the current trends in energy consumption across different sectors in the U.S., and how will the growing adoption of electric vehicles over the next 10 years impact the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, Isaac, this is I love the first name. This is a great question, because we are seeing in Texas alone, we anticipate by 2030, I think 2030 or 2032, a 60% increase in electric consumption. You look at what happened during Winter Storm Uri, and 30% of our grid at that time was what I fondly, sarcastically call unreliables, these variable sources of electric generation that don't have a reliability standard on our grid. Today, that's 47% of our grid capacity is, again, unreliables, these variable sources of weather-dependent generation that don't have a reliability standard. And what we're seeing is an increase in cost. If we want to attract data centers here and more industry to Texas, we need to have a reliability standard. There's a couple of bills before the legislature that do that. I know Senator Kevin Sparks is carrying a couple of those in Texas, and Bill 714 and 715.
Kevin Sparks, I've done some interviews with him when he was getting ready to run.
Oh, great, good,
yeah,
good. I was in his office yesterday visiting with his team, passionately supporting 714 and 715. These are two bills that will essentially, what I say, fix the grid. They're going to ensure that we have reliable electric generation across the grid, and where if you do this, natural gas, coal, and nuclear will be able to make money, and costs will go down because you'll see new generation being built without subsidies. And this is going to level the playing field. And this is what's going to save Texas and stop us from having deindustrialization. But again, that 60% increase in electric demand just from things like AI and data centers. And we want them here in Texas. Bitcoin mining is growing incredibly. They're actually moving Bitcoin mines out to places where there's excess generation. West Texas. We've got too much generation out in West Texas because there's been an overbuild of wind and solar, because it's cheap land out there. They can get the subsidies, but you can't get it to places where you need it. And you lose electric generation across miles and miles of high voltage power lines. So let's move industry out there that needs that electricity. And great, they're going to have really low rates out there in West Texas. So good for them.
Reduces flaring.
It does, well. Yeah, especially with some of the on-site electric generators. I mean, right now, drilling companies are having to wait 9 to 12 months to get electricity to site. This is delaying production of oil and gas. This is delaying a reduction in the cost of energy that President Trump has said, we're going to reduce the cost of energy. We're going to reduce the cost of food. Those are two very closely related industries that are completely dependent. Chris Wright says that energy isn't part of the economy. It's really the heart of the economy. It is the economy. Everything revolves around the cost of energy. So I'm really optimistic about what's going to happen in the Texas legislature to really shore up our grid, to firm our grid is a language that we like to use. We firm up the grid. It's firming legislation that assures that we have electric generation when we need it, not when the weather's cooperating. This is going to help industry. This is going to send signals to industry to move here. And then if we can get some offsite generation built for drilling operations, great. They can go make their own little microgrid on site, use their own electricity, and you'll get energy sped up to market. I do think the EV adoption rate is going to continue to decline. We've seen a decline year over year. I'm about to publish research. We'll publish that on AmericanEnergyInstitute.com that really shows the subsidies that EVs receive. It's nearly $100,000 in subsidies per EV sold. It's because you and I are paying more for gasoline and diesel vehicles, the corporate average fuel economy credit. We're paying more in utility rates and transmission distribution. And then there's the lowest fruit on the vine, if you will, on the tree is this the subsidy that they receive, the tax credit, $7,500 tax credit. That's what people in Congress talk about, and most people think that EVs get. That's actually one of the smallest subsidies they get. It's the ratepayers, utility payers, and taxpayers are heavily subsidizing them, again, to the tune of $100,000 a vehicle. The corporate average fuel economy, the way it's written right now, is a mandate for automobile manufacturers to make EVs. Tesla would barely be profitable if it were not for selling the credits. This is one of the things.
Carbon credits. Yeah.
It's the corporate average fuel economy credits. They get credit for 718 miles per gallon for car that they manufacture. They're rated at 114 miles per gallon. Then you multiply that times 6.67. There's an illegal multiplier that they get if you're a pure electric vehicle. That's why Ford and GM and Stellantis have started making EVs, because they get the credits too. They need it to meet the corporate average fuel economy credit, which is slated to go up to 59 miles a gallon by 32, and by 2035, it's up 90 miles a gallon. It's absolutely absurd. You can't make that unless you give them this illegal multiplier that doesn't increase fuel economy. It's just a paper trading gimmick that I would say, people like Bernie Madoff and Sam Bankman-Fried and Enron accountants would blush at. They would absolutely blush like this is the biggest gimmick, and our government is doing it. If you get rid of that illegal multiplier, companies are going to start making vehicles that people want. They're going to start making hybrids. We're going to see hybrid electric vehicles take off. Their technology is going to improve significantly, and they'll focus on safety again and convenience, things that people want. But we're driving the oldest vehicles we've ever driven in this country. We are slowly but surely becoming Cuba, that is still driving vehicles from the 50s and 60s. Because they can't get new vehicles. And we don't want that to happen in the United States. I want people driving newer, safer cars, because that'll mean that my wife and kids are safer on the highways.
Wow. All right. So one of the things I wanted to be able to ask you about, because you brought it up there, is data centers, right? And obviously there is a huge push in the industry, or not just in the industry, but overall for, all of the things that AI is doing. And a lot of talk about, there's a lot of data centers that are going in the Virginia area.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also talk about, a lot of data centers coming into Texas because of the low cost and being close to natural gas. One of the things that I had read was, the top 3 cost items for building a data center. Number 1 was energy. Number 2 was HVAC. And then the number 3 was backup diesel generators. And if the number 3 cost item for building a data center is backup energy, like number 1's energy, and then number 3 is essentially another form of energy, so that just goes to show how important it is for these centers to be able to stay online, stay up and running. How much is that playing into kind of the circles that you're in, and people talking about having data centers here in Texas, and then maybe even the price of natural gas? Because the only thing that I think is going to bring the rig count back up, or maybe even bring the price of natural gas up, is the demand of having data centers across the U.S.
Yeah, and I really think if you could buy shares in Abilene, Texas, that place is going to just really boom when it comes to building data centers, because they've got the high voltage power lines that run right through there. So they can tap a lot of wind and solar electricity that's not making it to markets because they're just producing too much in West Texas. But you've also got the natural gas that's out there in West Texas too. So I do see a lot of data centers going in. The more natural gas we can get to market, I think the prices are going to be better for people. Some people oppose LNG export terminals because they think it's just going to raise the cost of LNG. It raised the cost of natural gas. I couldn't disagree more. It's just going, there's so much natural gas. It'll just reduce flaring, which would be a good thing. That's a waste of product, and we can get that product to market if it has value. But I really do think that we're going to see a continued growth of data centers in Texas, and I think they're going to be more out towards West Texas. The land's cheaper out there. I guess one thing that makes me a little optimistic about Northern Virginia and all the data centers there is you might actually see some of these tech companies, and they're already starting to do it, to realize the benefits of combined cycle natural gas, great baseload generation. It's cheaper per megawatt, long life expectancy, but they're also starting to see the benefits of coal. Coal's been demonized unfairly for decades as this super pollutant. It's terrible. It's awful. And they're realizing, well, gosh, because of our pollution control technology, it's not. And it's actually great for affordable and reliable energy. So it would be nice if kind of some of the tech companies quit listening to their alarmist younger employees and start listening to the realists that understand how important it is to our economic prosperity. And even in Abilene with the molten salt reactors, there's a great nuclear facility there. Natura Resources is a company that's based in Abilene, that's working with Abilene Christian University. I've toured the facility twice now. It has a great prospect. They just got their construction permits late last year. They will begin constructing, starting out, I think, with a 5 megawatt molten salt nuclear reactor in Abilene, Texas, gearing up to something that could be 50 megawatts or 500 megawatts. I mean, this could be transformative to the industry in a completely safe nuclear electric generation. You talk about clean and reliable and affordable. This is going to be great for electric generation. We need more. I'm hearing that within the next 18 months in Texas, we'll see another company come in with a small modular reactor permit approved and start building those and getting those to market. You're talking about something that can be put on the back of a tractor trailer or a flatbed trailer that could power drilling operations, that they don't need to wait on their power company to give them 12 months and spend $5 million to bring electricity to a drilling site. So that and the combined efficiency gains that Trisha Curtis, again, CEO and host of PetroNerds podcast, it's Our Economist, has been teaching me about how efficient drilling companies are now, that they're drilling longer, they're drilling more holes on the same pad. They're just so much more efficient. And she's saying that the number of drilling rigs isn't really a good economic indicator. We could still see the number of rig count go down, but production continue to increase.
Oh, I can give you a whole presentation on that one.
That's great.
Anybody that's seen my rigflation talk. So yeah, we can dive off into that one pretty heavy. So with the potential for the data centers, do you think that there's any policy changes or anything that
Yeah, I've actually got in my inbox right now some recommendations on the data centers to give them basically create their own sort of microgrids where they can produce electricity to power their data centers. So there definitely needs to be some policy changes that bring them. I think there's committees in both the House and the Senate that are looking at this. One of the things that leaves me a little bit concerned is AI reminds me of the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s, late 90s. That everything blew up so fast. At the time, I was living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and these huge, massive refrigerated distribution centers were built, and we got our groceries delivered to our house in a van, and it was great. I mean, we could get them the next day. I could place an order one night, and I'd have the groceries show up at our house. And I worked out of the house at the time, so it was great. It was really convenient. And you're seeing ads and these vans all over the place. And I'm in the transportation sector at the time, and I'm like, they're spending a lot of money. I mean, a refrigerated center costs a lot of money. Vans and trucks cost a lot of money. And then, of course, the bubble burst and they all went out of business. And then we had these empty refrigerated distribution centers. I hope that's not happening with the data centers, that they're growing too fast, but I'm afraid they are. And I heard the NVIDIA CEO talking at CES, talking about how he can do AI now on a personal computer. And it's like, you'll be able to do AI on your machine. You won't need to connect to servers to do AI. And that just blew my mind that they're getting to that kind of scale already. That's one of the reasons I'm not as worried about NVIDIA as some other people are, just with what's come out with DeepSeek in the last week.
Yeah, that's a whole nother
that's a whole other show.
Can of worms to be able to get into. All right, guys, if y'all got any more questions, be sure to throw them out there. He is hitting on all the, I guess, hot points. I have been studying for the last several
That's
years.
great. Well, check us out. You can follow me on X at Isaac for Energy, and you can find us number 4 American Energy on most social media.
So how could so the the person that's just watching now, how can they get involved? How can they support? Because like I said, a lot of the people watching here are oil and gas professionals. What is it that they can do to be able to help their industry, have the more positive light that they're looked on for what we are doing? But then also be able to communicate that to, I guess, other policymakers or somebody like yourself. What's the thing? What's the I guess the call to action for them?
Sure. Yeah. And I would guess go to our website, AmericanEnergyInstitute.com, and sign up for our emails. We do a monthly update once a month, but every now and then we reach out to people and ask them to connect with their elected officials. Like in Texas, we've done a couple of email letter writing campaigns to the Railroad Commission, which is our energy regulatory agency here in Texas. And the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. For example, last year, the Railroad Commission was considering updating rules and approving a permit on a waste disposal facility out in East Texas that has been in application since 2019. Spent over $5 million to get a permit approved to have a waste disposal site in East Texas. And the Railroad Commission and staff drug their feet. And it was because they were hearing so much from people that want to keep it in the ground, that want to ban fossil fuels that wouldn't last 2 weeks without them. But they think they want to get rid of them because they've got a mental issue, which is really unfortunate. People have been steered wrong for decades. And we've created this eco-anxiety. It's a name diagnosis from the American Psychiatric Association, Psychological Association. Over 50% of kids suffer from it today because they've read bad information in public schools, which is a different topic, but we're trying to fix that as well. But 5 years, could you imagine? I mean, since 2019, it's like if you wouldn't have built a home if it took you that long to build a home, and it's hurting economic opportunities. It's raising the cost to dispose of things in a safe manner. But so we did a letter writing campaign. We were able to get hundreds of people to write into the Texas Railroad Commission to tell them and encourage them to adopt the rules and thank them for their service. They were extremely grateful. They did. Texas Commission on Environmental Quality was considering, they were taking pre-comments on imposing Biden methane regulations that we think are going to be overturned. And we got over 100 people within a couple of days to send in letters to the commissioners at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So we have a sister organization. It's called American Energy Works. It's our 501c4 political organization that does some of this work, that communicates more directly with elected officials and does political work outside of the research that we do at the Institute. And so we would love for people to help us out on that front and get involved, because it's important their voices are heard, but also educate us on what's going on in your state, because then we have policymakers in Colorado and Wyoming and Montana, really all over the country. Alaska, I was in Alaska just a few months ago visiting policymakers there, and you see that every bank, almost every large U.S. bank has a position statement on their website that they won't do funding for projects in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. They're targeting Alaska. They want to keep people in poverty in Alaska. They're also taking people's private property rights. If you're withholding, and this is where this discrimination really drives me crazy, because it is a threat to our private property rights. And I have said that if Argentina had the ability to have private property rights like we do here in the United States, they would crush us within a decade of oil and gas exploration. Because my understanding is their geology, they're sitting on more oil and gas in Argentina than Texas is. And so They would be compelled to produce it if you had private property rights. But when the state controls it, you're not as compelled. The state just looks at it from their own best interest, not from the landowner's best interest or the private property rights best interest. But get in touch.
But maybe Javier Milei will change some of that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Milei is absolutely going to change some of that. So they are going to see economic prosperity like they never have. And it's already happening within a matter of months. It's amazing how things can change so fast. I've got a stack of Argentinian pesos, and I from a trip a few years ago, and I was like, I wonder how much this is worth. I mean, it looks like a fat stack of bills. It was like worth $1.30. It was a couple thousand pesos. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, it costs more to print this than it's worth. But yeah, just connect with us. And if there's issues that are going on in your state that you want help with, we've gotten involved in issues in South Dakota and North Dakota because we've heard from people that have asked for help.
Excellent. All right, guys. Well, thank you guys all for tuning in. All right, we're gonna do or I should ask, is there anything else that you want to throw out there?
Oh gosh, I could probably go on for hours. I was starting to get into the education aspect of things. I mentioned Scott Tinker. Look at his movies called Switch and Switch On. Mark Morano's got a couple of movies.
I think we're gonna try to get Scott on the show.
Oh, Scott's great. He's really good. He does it from I'm obviously political and I'm biased, and your watchers will probably tune into that. I'm super supportive of our current administration. And some of the nominees, and hope to be able to a place like I was during the previous Trump administration, to be in a place to influence the policies that are being made. But Scott Tinker does this great. He's very non-political, almost like Chris Wright. I think Chris is one of these guys that hasn't been very partisan. I was surprised to see that he supported President Trump because he's in Denver and he's got to operate a business. And I try to help some businesses depoliticize their message. Don't appeal to the right, don't appeal to the left, appeal to your customers and to your shareholders. And so I try to help some companies do that in all aspects of industry, not necessarily on the energy side. But the education thing is something that's absolutely passionate to me. I had an education elected official reach out to me today and say, take a look at this curriculum. It's going to be a requirement for, I think, 9th grade science stat class. Would you take all the alarmism out? And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to remove the bias in education so that kids learn about all forms of energy produced, all of them. Geothermal, nuclear, wind, solar, the components that go into them. We're getting them to study. We've been successful in changing some of the standards in the curriculum so the kids actually are going to learn about energy poverty and what it means, that, you know, the women walking to collect water, how you can really liberate them with access to affordable, reliable energy. Talk about life expectancy, how much better we are here. Be proud of the environment that we get to experience on a daily basis. So it's been really fun I think we're going to improve the mental health of this country by changing the education, removing the bias, because there's been, unfortunately, some people with political agendas that have been influencing education to the detriment of our children and to the detriment of their mental health. And so it's been, like I said, a lot of fun working on that and teaching kids positive things, making them proud to be consumers of energy, to live the high carbon lifestyle, and to really be proud to be an American, and that they get to live a first world experience, and that we don't want to see that go away. We've begun an energy education series called Energy 101. You can find that at AmericanEnergy101.com. I think we just launched our 3rd video this week. Again, AmericanEnergy101.com.
Oh, awesome. Good stuff. All right. Let's wrap it up. Let's do a giveaway. All right. Tracy's already got it up there for everybody that put in hashtag AKM. We're going to be giving away one of our 3D printed drill bits and a $50 Starbucks gift card. Let's go ahead and hit it there. Anybody that waited this long, I guess you're out of the running. And our winner for the day is, seeing a lot of familiar names up there. Oh, Red, do it again. That's my mom.
That's awesome.
We gotta hit draw again.
Oh, congratulations!
I don't even think
it's
the top right. There you are. Top, I think it is Tracy. She gets as many drill bits as she wants, and I don't think she's much for Starbucks, anyways. It'll probably. All right, Daniel. I've never seen Daniel on the show before, or I haven't seen that name before. So, Daniel, you are our winner today. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn or over to Tracy. We'll get your address and get everything shipped off to you. Special thanks to our sponsor for today's show, AKM. Really do appreciate it. Next week, we've got, who's that on the show next week, Tracy?
It is
Robert Connors, he's got the Substack Crude Audacity, I think is what it is. I apologize, Robert. I'm forgetting the name of your Substack, but he is another oil and gas data guy who puts out a lot of really interesting stuff, worked on the financial side before. So it's really cool to be able to see that. So he's going to come on and talk about the cyclical nature of oil and gas. So it's going to be a great episode. So you guys all tune in for that one. Thank you guys so much for being here. Have an absolutely wonderful weekend. And as always, know your industry.